tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hi there, and welcome to the Power of Zero show. I am your host, David McKnight, bestselling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You Lerp, The Volatility Shield, and most recently, Tax-Free Income for Life. Of course, I am working on another book even as we speak. You'll have to keep your ear to the ground for more information on that in coming podcast episodes. If you're looking to navigate all of the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, why not head over to davidmcknight.com? We're happy to introduce you to a member of our elite POZ advisor group, trained, vetted, qualified personally by me. If you are an advisor who's looking to level up your game and adopt the Power of Zero worldview, head over to powerzero.com and opt into our free 3-part video series. We'd be happy to chat with you at any point during that series. All right, so today we are going to be talking about some potential changes to the Social Security program. We're going to talk about what those changes are, and we're going to talk about what type of impact those changes could have on the long-term financial outlook for our country. So there's a Democratic representative out of California by the name of John Garamendi, who introduced a bill that proposes a change to how Social Security cost of living adjustments are calculated. He's entitled the bill Fair COLA, C-O-L-A, that stands for Cost of Living Adjustment, Fair COLA for Seniors Act of 2021. And basically what this bill proposes is that the Social Security increase each and every year be tied to the CPIE, which is the Consumer Price Index for the elderly, as opposed to the CPIW, which is the Consumer Price Index for workers. And this essentially would affect the Social Security for the 69 million Americans who are currently drawing benefits at this point. This is what he says. He says, using a COLA that accurately reflects how retirees spend their money, especially in healthcare, is a no-brainer that will increase benefits and make Social Security work better for the people it serves. And when he says work better, I think what he means is it will give them more money. So let's look at the difference between these two indices. So the Consumer Price Index for the elderly between the years 1982 and 2011 grew at a rate of 3.1%. Whereas that standard Consumer Price Index between 1982 and 2011 grew only at 2.9%. Now you may think that's not a big deal, those 0.2% difference over that time period. But remember, you also have to consider the value of compounding interest. When you add an extra 0.2% on your Social Security benefit over the arc of a 30-year retirement, you get compound interest on compound interest. So that Social Security benefit gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So let's talk briefly about what the COLA has been typically like over the last 10 years or so. So we know that under the CPIW, which is how they currently are calculating Social Security, the cost of living adjustment has only passed 2% twice since 2010. Okay. So if you were to add up all of the growth just in the last 6 years between the CPIE and the CPIW, the CPIE for the elderly, all that growth would have added up to 10.1 percentage points versus the CPIW, which would have only added 8 points to your increase in Social Security. There's a Social Security Medicare policy expert out of the Senior Citizen League by the name of Mary Johnson. She says that by switching from the CPIW to the CPIE, it may be good for seniors, but that may not always be the case. And the reason, she says, the biggest difference between the two is the weighting for gasoline. In years in which gasoline prices spike, such as 2021, then the CPIW, which is weighted more heavily for gasoline and transportation costs, would yield the higher COLA. So that's likely to be the case this year. So a lot of it depends on what gasoline prices are doing, because that's weighted in a disproportionate way in the CPIW versus the CPIE. Now, let's talk about, you've been hearing a lot about inflation in the news, and a lot of that inflation can be due to us coming out of COVID and not enough goods to go around to meet supply. But I think you need to keep your eye on inflation over time because, historically we've talked about the only way to fix our financial problems are either increasing revenue, reducing spending, or some combination of the two. I think increasingly as time wears on, politicians are going to be lured by the siren call of modern monetary theory. And as they print more money to try to solve the nation's problems, you're going to see that inflation tick even higher. The Senior Citizens League, which is a nonpartisan senior group, has estimated that the Social Security cost of living adjustment could be around 6.1% in 2022. And that's just based on Bureau of Labor Statistics through June. So this is increasing. This is up from the 5.3 estimate that same organization made based on inflation statistics in May. This is going to be the biggest cost of living adjustment for inflation that we've seen in a really, really, really long time. All right. So we know that Garamendi, this Democrat representative out of California, attempted to introduce this bill back in 2019. He got 35 other Democrats to co-opt the bill with them, along with 3 Republicans. The problem is this bill never received a vote. And as of July 6th, the full text of the new bill, H.R. 4315, has not been received by the Library of Congress. It was referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, in addition to the Committee on Veterans Affairs, Oversight, and Reform in Armed Services. So this is by no means a done deal. However, this legislation, according to all the surveys, receives overwhelming support from those who are on Social Security. That shouldn't be a huge surprise. 61% of those surveyed said that they supported tying the cost of living adjustment for Social Security to the CPIE versus the CPIW. Only 3% of those surveyed did not support the proposal, and those were probably Power of Zero listeners who recognize the financial implications of increasing the cost of living adjustment on a entitlement program that's already severely underfunded. So let's talk about the impact that were this legislation to go through, what type of impact would that have on the already tenuous fiscal outlook for our country? Well, we know that prior to COVID, Social Security was slated to run out of money in 2035. Because of COVID and all the borrowing we had to do and all of the money that will now have to be earmarked towards interest on the national debt, we know that that has put Social Security on an even more unstable footing. According to David Walker, the Social Security program could run out of money in 2032. And we also know that Medicare, which was supposed to run out of money in 2026, is now slated to run out of money in 2023. What does that mean? That means that the likelihood of higher taxes is even closer than we originally thought. And should this legislation go through, the costs of Social Security will be even more expensive in most years. Therefore, we have sort of accelerated the bankruptcy of the program. I'd be interested to see if they recast all of those numbers based on tying the cost of living adjustment to the CPIE versus the CPIW, what that would do to the fiscal outlook of the country, not just the country, but the Social Security program as a whole. And I think you would see that would bankrupt the program even sooner. So in other words, what I'm trying to tell you folks is that the tax freight train that is bearing down on America has the potential to pick up a little bit more speed should this legislation go through. Now, one thing I wanted to add in here at the end is I think that there's an even better way to increase your Social Security. You can increase your Social Security without having to rely on government legislation. How do you go about increasing your Social Security? Well, one of the great ways to increase your Social Security is by simply rearranging your assets, to tax-free investments. So in other words, if you have more than the ideal balance in your taxable and tax-deferred buckets, and we've discussed that the ideal balance in the taxable bucket is 6 months worth of basic living expenses. Remember, any 1099s that get cranked out of your taxable bucket count as provisional income. Anything above and beyond the ideal balance in the tax-deferred bucket, which is, remember, we want to have a balance that's low enough that your required minimum distributions are equal to or less than your standard deduction, but also low enough that they don't cause Social Security taxation. For most Americans, that's going to be about $350,000, okay? Anything above and beyond those ideal balances in the taxable and tax-deferred bucket should be systematically repositioned to tax-free. And if you have the right amount of money, right amount of dollars, the right balance in those two buckets in a rising tax rate environment, and everything else gets repositioned to tax-free, you can be perfectly positioned to not only insulate yourself from the impact of higher taxes, but also to put yourself in a position where you get your Social Security tax-free. Now, think about it. If you have a $5,000 hole in your Social Security because of high levels of provisional income, how are you going to go about plugging that hole? You're going to take more money out of your IRAs and 401ks. And if tax rates double, think about the implications. You will spend down your retirement assets 5 to 7 years faster simply because you had to plug that hole in your Social Security due to your high levels of provisional income. So in short, how can you go about increasing your Social Security? You can increase your Social Security by simply positioning your assets such between those three buckets, allocating your assets between those three buckets such that your Social Security is tax-free. That will add an extra 5 to 7 years to your retirement. Okay. Because remember, when you have to give up a portion of your Social Security, you have to spend down all of your other stock market assets to compensate, to plug that hole in your Social Security. So we can always rely on the government and hope and pray that they will increase the rate at which your Social Security increases, or you can be a little bit more proactive and reposition your assets, allocate your assets in the right balance between taxable, tax-deferred, tax-free, and ultimately receive your Social Security tax-free. And that will give you a real shot in the arm in terms of increasing your lifestyle in retirement. So not a super long podcast today. I wanted to sort of bring this piece of legislation to your attention. Of course, if you need help navigating any of this, you can head over to davidmcknight.com. Happy to help, introduce you to an advisor who can shepherd you through all of these important decisions and help you allocate your assets between the three buckets in just the right way. And if you are an advisor, head over to powerofzero.com. We're happy to help you transition your practice to a Power of Zero style practice. Of course, you can always follow me on Twitter where I talk about this stuff all the time. It's at McKnight & Co, at McKnight & Co. Let me bring to your attention also that a lot of the solvency for Social Security is discussed in my documentary, The Power of Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. One of the really interesting parts that Alan Arbach, who's a professor out of UCal Berkeley, says you can't print your way out of Social Security and Medicare. Why? Because those two programs are tied to inflation. If you print money in an effort to make these programs solvent, then you increase the cost of these programs commensurately, which means it's like the dog chasing his tail. You never really catch up because as the supply of money grows, the cost of these programs grow commensurately. So go check out that movie. You can stream it on Amazon or anywhere you stream movies. Once again, if you would like to, I would really love it if you gave a review of our podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. And of course, subscribe. Thank you so much for being on the podcast this week. We will look forward to chatting with you same time next week.